Now let's move on to another essential topic, which is user research. You might have been in a situation where you're struggling between theory and the practice of user research in a company, or you have these perfect plans of research and then end up compromising them simply because of time constraints. Worse, you end up completely skipping research because you can't do it quickly enough. Well, our next speaker will walk us through the academic approach of user research by giving all her practical tips and advice to how to make it work in a high-pressure tech environment. So I think we have a lot to learn from our next speaker at this moment. And she has over 8 years of experience in the design field, but most importantly in the user research field. She has worked in various sectors such as Zalando and HelloFresh, and she also owns her own company, which is User Research Academy, which is a community and an education platform for people who want to learn about user research or become a user researcher. And actually, it doesn't stop there. She also writes extensively for Dovetail, Medium, and other platforms of design. So I'm really happy to welcome her. And by the way, she is actually from outside of Boston, and she's living currently in a British island near the coast of northwestern France. I had to Google that. And she loves to walk her dog, play video games, and listen to true crime podcasts. Let me introduce you to the founder and managing director, Nikki Anderson.
I'm super excited to be here today. And what we're going to talk about, as Jade mentioned, is that balance between tech and rigor in user research. Although Jade did a really great job introducing me, I just wanted to quickly say hi. I am Nikki, and that, more importantly, is my dog Poncho, which everybody seems to like quite a lot. As Jade mentioned, I've been a user researcher for over 8 years now, specializing in qualitative research. I love Pokemon and World of Warcraft. There was a new Pokemon game that just was released last week, or at the beginning of this week. Last week, and I've been playing that nonstop. So if you're a Pokemon fan or a World of Warcraft fan, please reach out. And then I also, for fun, love writing psychological thriller novels. It's currently National Novel Writing Month. So I've been really busy working on a new book. And then finally, my favorite sports are fencing and archery, which I can actually do on this small island that I call home. They have some old school sports here. So super fun. For today, more importantly, I want to focus on 3 particular areas. The first one is how to get alignment on your research projects. The second one is investigating the research process to see where we can kind of speed up our process. And the third one, we will really quickly talk about some ways in which you can kind of put together continuously efficient research. So, I don't know if anybody else has felt this way, but I get this request a lot. We need research in 2 weeks. And I'm like, oh no, that is very, very fast. But okay, let's do it. Let's do kind of a sprint for research. And then I present the report and they say, you only spoke to 5 people. And I go like this. I'm not sure if anybody else has ever encountered this situation, but it's something that I have seen, heard, and experienced many times myself and with other colleagues that I've talked to. So there's a huge imbalance between tech and rigor being kind of the quality of user research, since user research technically comes from that academic, rigorous scientific research, and it's been molded into a tech organization. So a lot of the times research isn't done quickly enough for teams. So you have somebody coming to you being like, oh, we need research in 2 weeks. And you're like, I need 3 weeks at least to do this research. And that leads to something like teams skipping user research because there isn't enough time to do it on that timeline. And then if you the example from before, user research can sometimes be done too fast. And what this can lead to is invalid insights that are gathered and misinformation that is spread across the organization. So what that means is nobody ends up wanting to do research because it's either too slow or it happens too quickly and we can't get to that actual deep root of the problem. So our insights can be a little bit shallow or they can be misrepresented. The problem with this is when we don't do research, we don't set up a foundation for the proper research and design for the next steps. So we're unable to, catch up and give our colleagues the information that we need to make better decisions. And so whenever I talk about this imbalance between tech and rigor in user research, it's always so important to think about, okay, yes, the user research process is based off of this academic kind of scientific model, but where is it that we can kind of speed up our process? Where is it that we can optimize different areas of our process in order to bring these insights to our team so that they can use them in a time manner that works for them? So we really need to set up this foundation for proper research so that we are able to make better decisions about designing for the next steps and designing for tomorrow. So how do we do this? Let's start with alignment. So alignment and focus is the first step to an efficient research project. Without alignment and focus, bad things happen. I used to not align with stakeholders before research, and I would end up at the end of a project, and I would say, "This is what we found," and they would say, "That's not what we needed to learn." And I would be like, "Oh, okay, that's not good. Let's redo it and let's spend more time. Let's spend more money. Let's spend more effort doing all of this." So alignment and focus are really important. And what that comes in the form of is something called a research plan. So I start every single project still to this day, even like my consultancy projects, like 8 years later, I start with a research plan. And this research plan is an overview document that talks about what the research actually is. It's a reference point for the goals, the timeline, who's involved in the research, what the expected outcomes are. This document is really unbelievable in getting that alignment. It keeps your team on track. It ensures that the goals of your research are defined and, more importantly, agreed upon. Because again, the worst thing that can happen is you can start a project and you can go for it, and then suddenly the results are not anything like what the stakeholder was looking for. So if you don't get this stakeholder input beforehand on what research questions they have, even if they're biased questions, you can turn them into unbiased questions later. If you don't get that understanding of what they need, you are going to be in the dark of what you should be delivering. And that really slows down your process. So research plans essentially allow us to move faster and more efficiently through a research project because we're starting with that alignment in mind. And so I'm not going to go through these in complete detail, but these are the main components of a research plan. So you have the background of the research plan. You have some success metrics that show you whether or not you've been successful with this particular project. You have the goals of the research, which you've aligned upon with your stakeholders. And then you go into like the breakdown of the participants, the method you've chosen, which all relate to those goals. Then you can have your interview guide in there, a timeline, so everybody knows when everything's meant to be happening, when everything's meant to be done. And then I always include resources in my research plan to make it easy for stakeholders to find things like the raw data or the interview videos. So I just want to give a quick example, actually from HelloFresh, of a sample research plan that I put together. So a team came to me and they were saying, okay, we at HelloFresh, we give discounts to people. So we're like, yay, 50% off of your first box. And for anybody who doesn't know what HelloFresh is, I will take a second. It's a meal kit. So you get sent the exact number of ingredients you need to make certain meals. And it's supposed to speed up efficiency in cooking and not having to go grocery shopping, less waste, and give you cool ideas of different meals to try. So what happens is we say to people, okay, 50% off your first box if you sign up. and people go ahead and sign up, and then suddenly they disappear. So they cancel their subscription right after they get that discount and right after they sign up for the first box. So through this project, we were trying to understand why people were canceling the subscription after their trial, including these unmet needs that we were trying to find, and pain points. So as you can see here, what I did is the first thing when the stakeholders came to me, I outlined this research plan, which includes these goals, the success metrics, the participants, the method, just a very quick interview guide example, and then the timeline. So what I did is I started with these goals, and what that helped me with is first, the stakeholders were like, yes, this is exactly what we need to know. And then it helped me define the participants better. It helped me define the method better. So as soon as these goals were aligned upon, I could just move quickly through recruitment. I could move quickly through understanding what kind of questions I had to ask these participants and what kind of questions I needed them to answer. So it was just a really wonderful example of kind of getting this request and immediately going into this research plan. And honestly, the timeline was 4 to 5 weeks, but we had this done within 3 weeks because we are just able to move so quickly. So again, I just want to say writing this research plan is like the first step in balancing that tech and rigor kind of dance between the two of them. Again, everything just becomes more clear. You're able to align expectations and outcomes with your stakeholders and make sure that your process goes faster and is aligned with everything that you need at the end. So I just wanted to take a second, like research plans are part of my general process, but they warranted their own section. So I would really highly recommend the next time a project comes to you is kind of starting with that research plan and getting that alignment so that you can move more quickly through the rest of your research process. So now what we'll do is we'll kind of move into that research process, and we'll look at these 5 kind of processes. And this is just a very generalized research process where you go through the planning and scoping, the recruitment, conducting, synthesizing, and reporting. And so what we'll do is we'll go into each of these areas, and I will highlight some ways that you can kind of speed up your process and go into an example in each of those. So where can we speed up our process, and where do we actually need to take our time? So let's start first with planning and scoping. So when you're planning and scoping your research project, there are 3 ways that you can kind of help yourself move more efficiently. The first one is starting with an intake document, and then we have writing the research plan that we just talked about and creating a roadmap and a backlog. So I'm going to go a little bit more in depth in terms of starting with that intake document. So an intake document is something that I give my stakeholders when they come to me with literally like a sentence of 2, or like, we need research done on this topic. And I'm like, I need more context. So what I do is I send them this research intake and they fill it out. And what's really cool is that I can actually take this intake document and immediately start crafting a research plan with it. And so they actually think through their research requests more. They give me more detail. They give me more context. And I can kind of already start to form a plan just from this intake document. And what that generally leads to are fewer meetings of like, what do you mean by this? What do you mean by that? Oh, what kind of participants are you looking for? So instead of the back and forth, you get all of that information answered in this intake document. And you can kind of comment asynchronously if you want, but then translate this into a research plan. And it actually leads to clearer requests and clearer projects because stakeholders are thinking through what they need from you by answering these questions. And for me, it took me about 1 to 3 months to implement this research intake into my various organizations. And so moving on to kind of the recruitment section of our process, what can we do to optimize recruitment? So something called snowballing with participants, asking good participants to come back, or if they know a friend or a colleague that they could recommend to you to talk to. Then you also have internal usability testing where you test with colleagues, and then templates and tools. And I'm going to dive into really quickly to some of the templates and tools and channels that I use for recruitment. But recruitment takes forever. Recruitment is like everybody's least favorite part, at least for from my perspective of what I've heard. And so some of the tools that I've used in the past for recruitment are something like Hotjar. So having a pop-up on a page for you to get constant recruitment, having a landing page for people to go to if they want to sign up for research sessions. I use Calendly for scheduling, so I don't need to worry about time zones and going back and forth. Like, are you available on this date at this time? Oh no, I have to reschedule. So Calendly is something that has like completely saved my life in that. And then these are the different channels that I use as well for recruitment. LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Reddit. Try it out. You never know who you're going to find on Reddit, I feel like. So try out these different channels and try out these different tools to kind of like optimize that process even more. And usually this takes me about 1 to 2 weeks to implement in an organization. And then we have conducting research. So we want to optimize our research sessions. This isn't about talking faster to participants, but more about like other people that can help support you. So inviting a note taker so that you can focus on the session, or doing something like creating a sign-up sheet. So this is a sample sign-up sheet that I use to invite stakeholders to observe the sessions. It encourages the team to get involved. The more people there are, the easier synthesis is in the end, because you can split it among multiple people rather than just doing synthesis yourself. This also encourages a note taker to join every session and help you out with notes. It's taken me about 2 weeks to implement this at an organization. Some organizations, it's taken me up to a month because people were dragging their feet to sign up to sessions. But this is just a really great way to encourage people to join you and be part of your process. And then we have the synthesis process. This is where I will say we can't really speed up synthesis, but if you want to do things that make your life easier in the end, a debrief is really great. So debriefing with stakeholders, this means coming together at the end of every session and doing a quick download of information. What did we learn? Per participant after each session. And what this does is it means the synthesis session at the end, instead of trying to synthesize 7 people at once, you've already done an initial synthesis in the beginning. And so now you're just pulling together the themes rather than saying, okay, we need to look at all 7 of these people at once. You're kind of breaking that up and you're making it more digestible, which actually gets teams more involved because the end synthesis is less time and less effort. So debriefing is a really great way. But as I said, synthesis generally takes double the time of a session. So 1 hour interview takes 2 hours to synthesize. So this is the place where we don't really want to speed things up as much. And now finally, our last area in our process is reporting. So there are several ways to optimize your reporting, such as research summaries. Using a report template, knowing your audience is very helpful because you know what you need to say to them, what questions they need answered. I'm going to dive into research summary as an example really quickly. This is something I do after each session, either instead of or in addition to the debrief session, where I just write down all of the themes or interesting things that I heard during that session. So this research summary is per participant. And similar to the debrief, it helps you remember what happened, keep track of the themes that are happening, which then makes synthesis easier in the long run. And also teams really love these reports. I absolutely love them. And it makes your report writing faster in the end because now you're just pulling things from these research summaries rather than, again, looking at all these participants and saying, oh, okay, what do now I need to synthesize from all of these people and write a report from 7 people. You're really just pulling these apart from your different summaries. So it's a lot of upfront work, delayed gratification that makes your life easier in the long run. And then I will just quickly talk about continuously efficient research. So creating a customer panel is something that you can do. So inviting people to come to your panel so that you can always have a pool of participants to reach out to. This doesn't have to be 100,000 people. It can be 20, it can be 30. When I started at my company, we had 10 people that we pulled from when we were in a bind and we really needed research. And that eventually grew to over 1,000. But we have to start somewhere. And this is a great way to speed up your targeted recruitment. A rolling research program as well is just continuous research. So every month you do research sessions and you can pull from that customer panel and teams can sign up for it. Or a demo desk, which is where you put things that your team is working on and people can come around and like your colleagues can come around, play around with it and give that feedback, which is similar to that internal testing. So you're actually asking your colleagues to get involved and asking them, hey, what do you think of this new feature that we're trying out? This is especially cool during within a B2B organization, because you can ask account managers to come over and like play with these features. And they're like, yeah, our clients are going to hate this or our clients are going to love it, so it's just that initial understanding of how this might be received. And so some next steps for you, which I would encourage, is identify 3 ways you can optimize your process by trying some of the tactics that I mentioned during these processes. And then also own it yourself. You don't need to use every rule, follow every template exactly how it is. I'm going to share the templates with all of you that I have for the research plan, the intake document, recruitment emails. I'm happy to share all of those with you. You can make them your own, make them whatever it is that your organization needs to succeed. And then finally, what I would say is always check back with your stakeholders. Make sure things are going well. Make sure there's feedback that you're getting, that things are optimized as much as possible, so that your debrief sessions are going well. People are enjoying this. So definitely seeing and checking back with your stakeholders. But thank you all so much. Here are some of my details. Feel free to reach out at any point. And then, as I said, I will share these resources with everybody at the end of the conference. But thank you all so much.
Thank you, Nikki. Thank you for your talk. And I really, really appreciate that it's really hands-on and you really give us practical tips in here. And maybe I have to remind just for the audience that feel free to drop your questions in the chat so that I can relay them to the speaker here. To start off with, I have already a first question that is, how can you persuade your stakeholders that user research is essential for the project, for people that are maybe struggling out there to get it done?
Really great question. I tried a really long time. I was begging people and pleading people, please do research. We need to do research. Research is so important. And the thing is, we don't want to try and beg people or persuade people. What we actually have to do, and what I found is especially effective, is ask them, what are the goals that they need to accomplish? What are they trying to accomplish? What are they trying to get done, right? And we need to see how research fits into those goals. So how can we use research to help them achieve their goals? So if they're trying to get a feature out, let's say a new feature, and the feature needs to have a certain metric behind it. So let's say we want 30% of users to adopt this feature or 50% of users to adopt this feature. What I would say is, hey, how do we know that people are going to use this? How can we ensure that people will adopt this feature? So we're taking their goal and we're asking them how they're going to achieve their goal. And then what I would say is, what user research can do is it can help us ensure that people will adopt it by us understanding whether or not it's usable, or whether or not people enjoy using it, or whether or not people have pain points with it. So what I always try and do, and my method for this, is understand the goals of the people that are deciding whether or not to do user research, and try and tell them how user research can directly positively impact their goals. I would also say, if time is of essence, de-scope the research. So this is more so in usability testing, where you can test with fewer people, only 5-7 people per segment. So pick a segment and only test with those 5 people and try and show the value of that really quick test. And so then people see, oh, okay, interesting, this bug, this problem, oh, we should fix that, maybe we should test a little bit more. So you can start small and show people that value if time is a problem for them. But I would say, rather than trying to beg them and persuade them to do user research, the best thing that you can do is understand their goals and tell them how user research can help their goals.
In bite-sized chunks to make it more digestible. Yes. Yeah, I can understand that. Been there, done that indeed. How about maybe building up on that setting the goal part? Sometimes they also struggle in defining the goal or setting the metric. Do you have any tips on how we can help them in let's say, phrase it or define it together with the researcher in a better manner?
Yeah. So in terms of metrics, it's hard because this is a very dependent topic for your organization. But for metrics, I like to say, what is it that as a business we want to achieve at the end of this project? So a lot of times metrics will be like conversion rate or adoption rate or retention rate. There's like the R metrics, like the pirate metrics. And those are really common metrics that are used during research projects that you can kind of look into. So I would really recommend looking into those metrics, the pirate metrics, because they touch on things like adoption, acquisition, retention. And those are the kinds of metrics that we can use at the beginning of a project for success. So like, for instance, if we are creating some sort of feature, like let's say we're creating accounts on our app. So we want people to be able to have accounts. That would likely go under retention, right? Because we're trying to keep people onto our platform. We're trying to get them to sign up. We're trying to get them to be more loyal. We're trying to get them to give us more. So that would go under something like retention. So we're trying to understand how people think about accounts, and if that's something that would bring any value to them, and that would go under retention. Or if we're trying to acquire new customers, where we're creating a feature that a lot of people have asked for in the past, and we're creating this feature so that we get new people in. So kind of think about where you are. What are you trying to achieve as a business with this feature, with this product? And that can kind of help you pick those metrics that you can play around with.
Okay, yeah, I think we can definitely try that out as of tomorrow. Maybe I'm seeing another questions coming in. How do you mitigate situation when research results do not align with the business expectations?
This is fun. So this is really difficult. Whenever I've had to deliver research that kind of tells us, let's say tells a team, stop moving in the direction that you were excited to move into. So stop this feature, or, this isn't going to work, or people don't like this. Something that's really important is for you to come up with like, what else, so like people don't like this, but they really find value in X, Y, and Z. Maybe we can go in this direction. Here are some ideas. Maybe let's talk to the designer and come up with some quick sketches of like these different ideas that would bring value to users. So whenever I find myself coming to stakeholders with kind of like, this idea is not going well, people don't like this, people don't find value in this, I always try and say, but these are the things people do find value in. These are the things that we can look more into that would bring us more money, more users, more downloads, more engagement. So always coming with like additional recommendations on what you can do next, because you don't want to just say like, oh, this didn't work, and then everybody's kind of like slumped over, like, okay, now what? So you can answer that now what by telling them like, what is it that people value? What is it that people find helpful, and start them on that track already.
Okay, I understand. So not feeling stuck, but really showing them new perspectives to kind of move on from that lesson. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Maybe one last question before the break. How do you imagine the future of research And which will be the main advances in your own words?
Yeah, so I see research going in a few different directions. So I see research kind of like exploding into organizations, even smaller organizations who didn't have the budget for research. So, like looking at the market in terms of jobs, there are actually a lot more research jobs out there than there used to be. There's a bigger demand for researchers in organizations. Kind of like the next steps that I see for research are trying to like systemize how we do research, so that there's less like variability in people's practices, because like people in research come from all over. Like you have people who are from psychology, from human factors, but you also have people from anthropology, journalism. I know police officers that have become user researchers, right? So their researchers come from everywhere. And I think that there will be a movement in terms of like helping everybody kind of systemize how they do research, and making sure that we're all doing research like in the best way possible, the most valid way, the most reliable way, so that it becomes a little bit less of like what I did, which is like, let me Google how to do personas. Like when I first was trying to figure out how to do personas 8 years ago, I was on there Googling and looking at these templates and like trying to come up with something that made sense. And I had no idea what I was doing, and less of that and more of like a rigor to it, and more resources available to the community to get into research. So I really think that we're starting to move in that direction as research becomes even more in demand and even more popular.
Yeah, I can completely relate to that. Thank you, Nikki. It's really a pleasure to meet